confident, apprehensive, or inclined to cry help, I wondered if it was possible to vote for all four at once. Because at any given time in any given day in politics, I do move from being apprehensive to crying help to feeling mostly confident, and then at 7 o'clock when I can open a bottle of wine, at last I feel buoyant. The other thing that I want to thank Anna for is her generous introduction. She was kind enough to say that she felt that I had been a breath of fresh air last year. But then, as she developed her meteorological metaphor, it became clear that she felt that perhaps over the last 12 months I had been closer to a mighty eruption of wind. And I'm sure that the truth lies somewhere in between. But I'm very grateful to Anna for introducing me, because I wanted to begin by reflecting on one of my favorite Radio 4 programs, second only to Farming Today, which is The Long View. It's presented by the superbly talented Guardian columnist Jonathan Friedland. And The Long View asks us all to consider current events in their historical context. And it draws parallels between the controversies of our time and the challenges of the past. Now, few professions, of course, take a longer view than agriculture. Farmers plan, invest, and produce for the long term. While those of us who are in Westminster live in a world of hourly Twitter storms and daily news cycles, where a week is now a very long time in politics, farming requires the patience and foresight to think in harvests and life cycles, to see beyond the immediate and to scan the far horizon. Now, of course, the immediate political question which all of us must wrestle with is Brexit, and more particularly how Britain leaves the European Union in less than 3 months' time. And I'll address that question head-on in a moment. But first, I do want to take a deliberately longer view. Because hugely significant as the changes generated by Brexit will be, it's important that we consider them in the broader context of the wider forces driving change in farming, food policy, and our relationship with the rest of the natural world. Because the truth is, as this conference is designed to underline, our world is entering a fourth agricultural revolution. The first revolution was the move from hunting and gathering to settlement and cultivation, which made possible the generation of surpluses, the beginning of trade, and the establishment of civilization. The second agricultural revolution was pioneered here in Britain, from the 17th through to the 19th centuries. British farmers and landowners developed more sophisticated crop rotation and new mixed farming methods, which more efficiently turned pasture into protein and waste into fertilizer. Alongside the development of new seed drills, selective breeding, large-scale drainage schemes, and land reclamation, all these changes dramatically increased food production. That helped drive an equally dramatic increase in population numbers, which in turn sustained the Industrial Revolution. The third agricultural revolution was even more significant in its scale. In the middle decades of the last century, pioneering work by visionary scientists such as Norman Borlaug, whose granddaughter is with us here today, transformed the scale of food production worldwide. New seed varieties were generated that powerfully improved yields, and alongside improvements in fertilizer manufacture, pest control, and other forms of crop protection, they allowed developing nations to overcome scarcity and hunger, laying the groundwork for the global economic growth which has lifted billions out of poverty. Now, we're on the verge of another revolution in how we produce our food. And that's why I particularly welcome what your chairman, Tom Allen Stevens, called earlier the brazenly positive tone of this conference. We stand on the threshold of new horizons, Tom argued. Never before has our industry been offered the world of opportunity that presents itself here before us today. And he's right. Accelerating technological advances, as he mentioned, such as the drive towards artificial intelligence, the more sophisticated than ever analysis of big data, drone development, machine learning, and robotics will together allow us to dramatically improve productivity on traditionally farmed land, not least by reducing the need for labor, minimizing the imprint of vehicles on the soil, applying inputs overall more precisely, adjusting cultivation techniques more sensitively, and therefore using far fewer natural resources, whether carbon, nitrogen, or water, in order to maximize growth. Data analytics allied to the sensors which monitor the health of livestock, will also allow us to develop the optimal environment for animals, helping us to get their nutrition right, safeguard their welfare, and improve both dairy and meat production. Gene editing holds out the promise of dramatically accelerating the gains that we've secured through selective breeding in the past. The ability to give Mother Nature a helping hand by driving the process of evolution at higher speed should allow us to develop plant varieties and crops which are more resistant to disease and pests and less reliant on chemical protection and chemical fertilizer. They will be high yielding and more environmentally sustainable. Vertical farming, with vegetables grown in temperature, moisture, and nutrition-controlled indoor environments, can also guarantee improvements in yield while at the same time limiting environmental externalities. And of course, vertical farms not only minimize land use, but they can, of course, be located close to the urban population centers that they serve. And we are also likely to see more and more of our need for protein met by aquaculture and cellular agriculture. Fish farming is an increasingly efficient way of using crops to generate nutritious proteins, and advances in synthetic biology may allow us to create traditional animal products, from gelatine and egg whites to milk and even meat, in labs. The potential for Britain to lead in this revolution is huge, which is why Tom Allen Stevens is right that we should look to the future with confidence. Now, of course, there are challenges. To take advantage of precision technology, AI, robotics, and data analytics requires a level of capital investment which is not available to all. There are also important ethical and economic questions about gene editing, which we need to debate. Vertical farming relies on energy inputs, which are currently costly and carbon intensive. Fish farming, of course, generates its own environmental externalities. And lab-grown proteins, meanwhile, are very far from everyone's idea of a mouth-watering treat. And they're currently extremely expensive. But while there are big questions we need to debate about how we handle these new technologies, and we're better to debate them than at the Oxford Farming Conference, we cannot wish away these changes any more than we can ignore having to deal with the impact of climate change, air pollution, soil depletion, global population growth, the stress placed on water resources, the tide of plastic in our oceans, deforestation, and biodiversity loss. Because the background against which this fourth agricultural revolution is occurring, indeed many of the stimuli for it, are the environmental and social factors that I've just briefly listed. The requirement to use less carbon, to limit the nitrous oxide entering our atmosphere and the nitrates entering our rivers, to improve the organic content and fertility of our soil, to renew, to reuse, and to recycle finite natural resources, and yet at the same time also to improve resource productivity as the human population grows. All these are the forces driving technological innovation. Science is thus both making us aware of why agriculture needs to change and also enabling that change to meet our needs. This fourth agricultural revolution will therefore require us to change the way that we work on the land and invest in its future. It will force us to reform the role of government in regulating and supporting farming. It will demand new thinking and new talent in food production. And it will inevitably require tough choices to be made. For some, the adjustment will undoubtedly be challenging. But no change is not an option. Reform is vital to modernize the sector and to capitalize on technological advances. In 2016-17, more than half of the UK's farms earned less than £20,000, and a fifth made no profit at all. As John Varley of Clinton Devon Estates observes, these statistics would make most investors that are not looking for tax breaks steer well clear. If, however, we embrace the potential of the fourth agricultural revolution, we can guarantee the future of the United Kingdom as a major global food producer. We can play our part in alleviating poverty and scarcity. We can replenish our store of natural capital. We can secure investment for the innovations in tackling waste, pollution, and emissions which the world will increasingly need. And we can hand on both a healthier economy and an enriched environment to the next generation. So, as the German statesman Otto von Bismarck once put it, if revolution there is to be, far better to undertake it than undergo it. So today I hope to outline how DEFRA sees its role in the midst of this fourth revolution, with respect to all the areas for which the department is responsible, food, the rural economy, and our environment. Food first. Food production has been a success story for Britain. Food and drink is our biggest manufacturing sector, with our food and drink contributing £113 billion to the economy every year. And the consumer has benefited from the enterprise and innovation of our food producers. British citizens have a wider choice of high-quality food than ever before, and the cost of food for the consumer has fallen significantly in recent decades. And we have safe, nutritious, affordable food in abundance in this country because of our farmers, their hard work, enterprise, and commitment. But we cannot take this bounty for granted, and nor can we ignore the looming problems that we face. In a world facing the pressures that I listed earlier, how do we provide food security for this country? Do the economics of contemporary food production add up? How do we help those in this country and across the globe who are living in poverty? And since diet is central to health, does our approach to food currently maximize human well-being? And critically, what do we think is required to make food production in this country truly sustainable? The fourth agricultural revolution would require us to rethink the future of food in any case. But if coming scientific and technical innovations are to be harnessed wisely and in harmony with human flourishing, then we need, as a country, to have a much wider and more informed debate about food. That's why I've asked DEFRA's lead non-executive director, the food entrepreneur Henry Dimbleby, to lead on the development of a new food strategy. He'll be visiting farms and food producers and working with people across the industry to ensure that we ask the right questions. On food security, for example, I think it's critical that we conceptualize the challenge properly. Our food security currently rests on both healthy domestic food production and, of course, global trading links. But healthy domestic production in the future is likely to require not just investment in new technology, but also our improving the resilience of the environment on which we depend for future growth. So food security in the future should mean, for example, returning soils to robust health and improving their organic content. It should also mean keeping pollinator numbers healthy and improving animal welfare and husbandry to minimize health problems and disease risk. It will probably also require us to build in resilience and flexibility to our agricultural sector so that we can deal with changes that we cannot anticipate by ensuring that we have diversity in both the size and the type of farm business in this country. And food security will also mean guarding against those looming changes that we can foresee, taking steps to minimize flood risk, to adapt to climate change, and to safeguard biodiversity, so we have a rich bank of natural capital on which to draw for the future. And food security necessarily also involves providing consumers not just with a plentiful and resilient supply of food, but with guarantees on provenance and welfare, which is why the new Livestock Information Programme, which Minette Batters has championed and helped to secure this year, is so important. It will enable us to reassure domestic consumers on the safety of our produce, as well as securing a competitive edge in a world market where quality is increasingly key. Now, of course, with respect to future trade, we know that there will always be food and materials required for food production, which we will have to source from abroad. But we also know that climate change is going to have an impact on the resilience and range of food production in other countries, particularly in the global south. So countries like our own will have to play an even more important role in world food production. And if we are to maintain our own resilience and reputation for quality, that means that we must maintain our own high environmental and animal welfare standards. And we must not barter them away in pursuit of a necessarily short-term trade-off. And that takes me to another one of the key questions about the economics of food production. Affordable food for every citizen is a key goal of public policy. But we should be clear about the real costs of food production. Beef or soybeans produced to scale on land in other countries that have been cleared of vast hectares of forests may appear cheap, but in fact, such food is costing the earth. The loss of forest cover imposes environmental costs on all of us, as valuable carbon sinks disappear and the defense against climate change is dismantled. The argument that we can lower the cost of food by importing from countries that have pursued deforestation policies ignores the fact that we all have to pay for the environmental damage in other ways. And there are, of course, other key economic questions that the food strategy must address. While consumers have enjoyed the benefits of increased efficiency in British farming, why have so many farmers not reaped anything like the same benefits? Compared with a generation ago, it's often the case that farmers receive a lower share of the money that we, the public, hand over to supermarkets and to other food retailers. Now, that's in part because of post-Farmgate innovation. Supermarkets are offering consumers added value, scrubbed potatoes, chicken seasoned and sold in roasting bags, which customers are happy to pay more for. But that innovation has inevitably reduced the percentage of the final price which has gone to the farmer. So, as farmers become even more efficient and they get an even better return per hectare, how can we ensure that we have a profitable farm sector alongside low prices for good food? Well, part of the answer is greater transparency. The more information we have, and especially the more information an increasingly discerning public have when they make consumer choices, the better that markets work. And if markets aren't working, because some players are operating unfairly or anti-competitively, then government should intervene. And intervention is also required when it comes to health. The growth in obesity, the acceleration in numbers of patients with type 2 diabetes, the spiraling in cases of diet-related heart disease and cancers, all require us to look at the impact of what we eat on how we live and die. This challenge, however, requires very careful handling. A crude attempt to label certain foods, meat, dairy, as somehow inherently unhealthy does not do justice to the scale and complexity of the problem. Neither does crude calorie labeling. A proper food strategy must look more widely at the socioeconomic factors and trends relating to diet and health problems, such as obesity, diabetes, and other diet-related illnesses. And the fact that these problems disproportionately affect more disadvantaged sectors of society should offend our sense of social justice. That's why we need to ask searching questions about just where, how, and why poor diet occurs. I want our food strategy, therefore, to be ambitious, to ask big questions, and to challenge lazy orthodoxies, to place food security on a sounder footing, to enable food producers to plan for the future with confidence, to provide a proper understanding of the real economics of the food industry, to harness the potential of new technology to improve productivity, to make that productivity growth genuinely sustainable, and to improve the nation's health. I see our food strategy as another opportunity for Britain to show a lead in this world of opportunity. Now, of course, there is already one conspicuous way in which we do lead the world when it comes to food. Our universities are home to some of the most respected agriculture, food, and environmental science, vet medicine, land management, chemistry, zoology, and botany departments in the world. A new generation of farmers, scientists, bio and agri-tech entrepreneurs are already reinforcing Britain's reputation as a centre of excellence and innovation. But I want us to go further. There is a huge opportunity for British talent to shape the fourth agricultural revolution. But we need to ensure that we attract even more talented people into the food and farming industry. I've been hugely encouraged in that regard by the work of colleagues such as Don Curry, Fiona Kendrick, Peter Kendall and Minette Batters, who've been collaborating to think creatively about the skills and talent that we'll need in the future to maintain leadership in the food production sector. And we will be saying more about what government can do to help when recommendations come forward through the Food and Drink Sector Council. But I've already been discussing with the Business Secretary Greg Clark and the new Higher Education and Science Minister Chris Skidmore the need for us all collectively to show even greater ambition. Now, of course, food is at the heart of every farming business, and farming is the backbone of the rural economy. Our ambition at DEFRA to lead the world in our thinking about food depends.
So there we are, the Environment Secretary Michael Gove in that speech to the Oxford Farming Conference, laying out his vision, as he said, for the fourth agricultural revolution.